This is a PODFIC recording of We All Love Bodyguards by Solitary Bird, narrated by Solitary Bird. This fic is rated teen for mentions of child abuse, drowning, gunshot wounds, and daddy issues. For context, this fic takes place after the events of KinnPorsche. Vegas is the head of the minor family with Pete by his side, and relations with his cousins are relatively repaired, though there is still a little distrust on both parts. A healthy amount of distrust for a mafia family to have, maybe. In the Laws of Attraction timeline, T and Thaenthai are teens when the pull scene happens, probably 16 or 17 years old. Chapter 1. When Vegas first walks through the doors, he's not expecting the view that meets him. "Pa!" the shout echoes off the tiled surfaces of the indoor pool room. He greatly disapproves of the interior design. It gives off a cold, run-down public leisure centre aesthetic. But that's not what's shocking. Politicians rarely know how to spend their money wisely. It's partly what makes them so easy to bribe. "Pa!" The shout is more of a scream now, the voice of someone who's just realised how willing their opponent is to take away their life. That fear, so distilled in the voice of what has to be a teen boy, was once Vegas's own fear from his own mouth. In the years since then, he's made many people who managed to find themselves on his bad side repeat those plea-filled screams, and not batted an eyelid. Yet the shade of red the politician's face goes as he grabs who Vegas has to assume is his son by the hair and shoves his face under the water is exactly the same as his own father. Looking at this father-son pair from across the pool feels like he's witnessing some sick alternate reality. Shivers of empathy went down Vegas's back. His father had never actively tried to drown him, but he'd certainly spent a lot of time suffering in Gunn's hands, mostly in an attempt to keep Macau out of his father's line of sight. It had been alright when he was the one suffering, but Macau was a child that he would never let his father lay his hands on. It was alright if Vegas was hit. He could take it. It was alright if Vegas was belittled. He could take it. It was alright if he was thrust into the cutthroat life of a member of the minor family. He had thrived in his own weird way. It was okay if he was weird and twisted. He had met Pete, who was just as weird and twisted as him. Somehow they fitted together and prevented one another from falling apart. He found himself walking ever closer to the poolside act, and as he did, the boy's eyes locked with his own, now close enough to make out the boy's features. It was easy to see that he couldn't be all that much older than Macau. Big doe eyes they were. Frightened, but there was a fire raging in them that mere pool water couldn't put out. A kid determined to escape, who even as Vegas watched was thrashing under his father's grip, causing the man to slip a little on the water-covered poolside. It was impressive. The man had to be at least twice the size of him. "Fuck," Vegas complained. He'd come here to strike a deal. And here he was about to intervene in child abuse. Kinn was never going to let this go. His cousin would be teasing him about it for months. Last time something like this had happened, Kinn had even gone to the effort of having t-shirts screen printed. He'd made Vegas take family photos with all the waifs and strays he'd gathered together in the minor family. Thatthep, that was this fucker's name, wasn't really helping his case either. As one, he hadn't even noticed that Vegas was here in the first place, and who wanted to deal with someone that dumb? And secondly, the kid somehow managed to get a good bite into him, and that just endeared him even more to Vegas. Who didn't love someone willing to start biting in a fight? If you were going to fight, then you had to be ready to become absolutely feral to stay alive. Unfortunately, the biting did nothing more than enrage the already maroon-faced Thatthep, who shoved his son's face back under the water of the shallow end of the ugly pool. He also started screaming insults at the boy, but how was he even meant to hear what was being screamed if his head was underwater? The man was an amateur. Before the head of the minor family managed to reach the pair, a door connecting the pool room to the rest of the house was flung open so wildly that it hit the wall on the other side, and the glass panel in it shattered. From the house, another teen dressed in a cheap-looking all-black suit barreled into the room, only catching himself at the last possible moment before he fell into the pool himself. A little baby bodyguard. The kid was shaking, though it was hard to tell whether it was from fear or anger. Thatthep, please stop this. Thatthep, he'll drown. This bodyguard was hovering, almost dancing on his toes in his anxiety, unsure how to end this without physically tackling his employer to save his son. He kept trying to reason with a man it was increasingly apparent it was impossible to reason with. Vegas had had enough. He wasn't in a good mood to begin with, but this guy was so stupid. Kinn could complain all he wanted when he returned without the deal signed. This deal going through would have been helpful. Getting land rezoned wasn't an easy task, but even as a sadistic mafioso, Vegas had standards. He wasn't going to be fake smiling and shaking hands with a piece of shit like this, when he could just as easily corrupt whoever took his place. Politicians were replaceable. There would be someone with better manners in front of guests, someone with better time management and deeper pockets. Whatever Kinn was trying to build in Dindang could wait a while. Vegas didn't care to start debating with the man about whether he should be attempting to drown his son in the pool of their family home or not. So for time and for ease, he shot him in the shoulder. Not a killing blow, but calculated to make sure he'd never use his arm the same way again. The gunshot echoed horribly in the tiled room, the other occupant finally taking notice of his presence once it had gone off. He pulled out his phone and quickly texted the backup team that was waiting for orders from him outside to come get rid of the evidence. Well, not quite all of the evidence. Thatthep had some rather fancy CCTV cameras that had overlooked the entire situation, and it would be wasteful not to keep a copy nice and safe in case anyone tried to do something ill-advised. Maybe the deal would actually be easier to make now that there was a plethora of blackmail opportunities to be had here. Vegas was sure he would take great pleasure in menacing him. Great pleasure indeed. At some point the kid had ended up fully in the pool, even though it was the shallow end, and he could have just stood up. He was flailing his arms and legs. Has no one taught this kid how to swim? He glanced over at the baby bodyguard, but other than screaming for Thaenthai, which he supposed was the half-drowned kid's name, he'd all but collapsed on the side of the pool. He was much too distraught to be of much help right now. Looks like it's up to me to be the hero, Vegas groaned, and then jumped down into the pool to pull this boy out. Thaenthai was limp when Vegas managed to get a hold of him. He'd finally passed out. Whether that was from fear or the amount of water he'd swallowed, he didn't know, but Vegas made sure to lay him in the recovery position as he vomited. Aspirating vomit was painful and potentially life-threatening, and Vegas hadn't shot a sitting politician in his own home, only to have the son he'd done it for to die on him. Kid, he gestured with a spare hand. Go get anything this kid would want to leave with, and anything you can't bear to leave behind. He just nodded, taking one last look at the teenage boy still vomiting pool water. Good at taking orders when under pressure, Vegas nodded. He had flicked big time after the shooting, but he was still a kid, and the head of the minor family had seen something in his facial expression that it seemed Thatthep hadn't. He'd seen it mirrored on the face of Thaenthai when T had appeared seemingly from nowhere. This moment had been inevitable. It was only that the two kids were just that little bit too young to take on the father themselves and win this time. Give it 3 or 4 years and they wouldn't have needed Vegas to intervene. They could have managed the situation alone. Unfortunately, they hadn't been given that time. Luckily for them, he had been here. Thatthep was still screaming and rolling around on the floor, but Vegas paid him no mind. The minor family members he had brought with him rushed in and started to deal with the mess. Blood from the injured politician's shoulder was mixing with the pool water that was everywhere and making the whole place look considerably more gruesome than it was. Vegas picked up Thaenthai, who was starting to come back round again, and placed him in the back of one of the cars. At least he would be out of the growing blood pool, and with the car heater on he'd dry off in no time. Make sure that you deal with the CCTV, Vegas said to one of his boys before shoving the other teen, who had returned with 2 bags, presumably filled with things he'd sent them, to collect in the car too. Keep a copy for us. Put your seatbelt on, you'll need it, he said as he slammed his foot on the accelerator, headed straight for the Major family's manor, where he could get this half-drowned kid some medical help that didn't come with any questions attached to it. Didn't need the kid getting secondary drowning in a hospital full of paparazzi to manoeuvre around on top of that. I'm sick of dealing with parents who can't even do basic shit for their kids. This is a new level, even for me. How much is it to ask not to actively try to kill the child you made? He growled as they headed out onto the highway. Hold his head so he doesn't smack off the window. They turned a tight corner at a speed that would probably flag every single speed camera along the way, and on any normal day would lead to a high-speed police chase. But today there wasn't even a peep of a siren. Luck was on their side. The kid managed to grab his unconscious peer in time, and Vegas was impressed. Given a few years, this kid would likely be a pretty good bodyguard, given the right training and some better food. He was looking a little scrawny, but that could be due to his height. How did you end up in this mess? If they were going to be stuck in a car for a while, they might as well get to know one another in the meantime. Baby bodyguard was the only one he could talk to till the other one woke up. Thaenthai gave me food when I was on the street. Another orphan, he thought. You're not the first to enter that business that way. Half the boys that work with me were picked up that way. Like a little stray dog, you buy them curry with extra rice and they follow you home. I just kind of ended up working there. His father always been that unhinged? Usually not this violently or publicly. Normally he just acts like Thaenthai doesn't exist. How long have you been in love with him? Vegas asks, smirking at the expression the younger boy makes in response to his question. There's a shocked silence for quite some time. No need to be embarrassed. My family specialises in dating our bodyguards. My eldest cousin is in denial that he's in a throuple with two of his bodyguards. His younger brother is all but married to his. I manage to cause havoc with mine on an almost daily basis. To be fair, Kim isn't dating a bodyguard, but he is dating his older brother's bodyguard lover's baby brother. We have to be, if not the gayest mafia family ever, then the queerest certainly. If you gather enough men in one place, then you're going to have some couples form, but the genes in his family really have to be something else because the propensity for queerness is really off the charts. Probably from day one, but I didn't know that then. I was too young. His hand was still gently cradling Thaenthai's head. It's only his hand and the seatbelt keeping the young master from flopping into the footwell. You got a name, baby bodyguard? T. T Thaenthai sounds pretty great. Not as good as Vegas Pete, but it's still got style. T looks at him with a bemused expression, and Vegas only then realises he hasn't introduced himself or told him anything yet. Where are we going? Things must have been pretty terrible in that house if you're willing to get in a car of a random man that shot your employer with said employer's unconscious child who just so happens to be your love interest. It's taken you a while to ask. Usually you ask a question like that before you get in a dangerous stranger's car. There was a silence from the back of the car for a while as Vegas yet again rounded a corner at a speed that only rally drivers could hope to recreate. I'm taking you both somewhere he can get medical help without half the nation knowing about it. Thank you. You're saying that like I'm some superhero, not a gangster that just shot your little friend's dad. He deserved it. Hopefully Thaenthai never has to see him again. And who was he to argue with that? They enter a residential street with unexpected speed humps, and T has to grab Thaenthai's head again to stop it from colliding with the ceiling of the car, and they practically become airborne. Thaenthai starts groaning, which is a very welcome sound. I think he's waking up a bit. T informs him from the back seat. That's good. I think he's going to throw up. That was not good. Vegas threw a roll of dog poop bags from the glove compartment into the back of the car. He had no idea why he still had them in here, but at this very moment he was glad to have them. T had only just managed to open one of the bags he'd hastily torn off of the roll when Thaenthai starts desperately throwing up pool water. His upholstery was saved. The kid deserved a reward for that. He'd only just had the thing professionally cleaned. Just as they enter the city limits, Sleeping Beauty begins to awaken from his slumber. At first he's scared and disorientated, but once he realises that T is with him, he calms down and even thanks Vegas for getting them both out of there. Who would think Vegas would be the getaway driver of a pair of traumatised teens? He imagined an alternative universe where a teenaged version of himself and a baby Macau was spirited away in the back of some random mobster's sedan by a teen Pete in the middle of the day. Pete had already saved him more than once, but he would have looked hot as fuck whilst doing it. It was a scenario he'd have to think about more in his free time. Before any of them realised, Vegas was already pulling into the compound's underground parking area, the discreet one where they stored all the family cars. T brought the bags and Vegas carried Thaenthai, who at this point was probably conscious enough to walk in himself, but he'd argued it was quicker for him to carry the kid. Waiting for them at the underground entrance is the customary search from the major family's bodyguards, but it goes by quickly. They've really streamlined the process since it was first implemented. Vegas vouches for the two of them before being let in and rushing them both up to the medical area to get seen by someone that knows what they're doing. When he crosses the doorway, roughly a dozen staff members come running. It's quite an impressive turnout, he muses, as he puts the kid down on a bed, glad that he hasn't been puked on. It might only be pool water coming out of him, but bodily fluids are bodily fluids. By the time everyone realises that it's the kid that needs to be seen too, and not Vegas, Porsche's turned up to see what the ruckus is. He's wearing a shirt that is very obviously Kinn's. The thing literally only has the bottom 3 buttons and trousers that are on inside out. He reins in the urge to point that out to him, but still smirks at his cousin's lover in a knowing manner. Really? In office hours? As amusing as it would be to mock being scandalised by his cousin's vanilla bedroom activity, there are more pressing matters at hand. When I heard you were rushing someone up to the medical centre, I thought something might have happened to Pete, Porsche explains, now considerably less flustered than he had been upon arrival. This is Nong Ti. In the middle of all those nurses is Nong Thaenthai, his Thatthep's son. I walked into him trying to drown him in that ugly-ass swimming pool. Tunken would have died immediately upon seeing how unaesthetic it was. I assume the deal's off? Vegas pulled out his phone to check whether Pete has messaged him anything, smiling at the saucy message, waiting there for him. Pete was a very imaginative and resourceful pet. He would have to reward him later. Maybe, maybe not. There was CCTV, so there's a good chance we can blackmail him into doing what we want. Anything else I should know? I'm taking these two back to the minor compound with me once the kids are both medically cleared. Make sure someone looks this baby bodyguard over for me whilst I go brief my dear cousin. Porsche snorts. Knock before you go in unless you want to see your dear cousin in only his briefs. Vegas leaves after clapping T on the back in an attempt to be reassuring and pulling a disgusted face at the thought of seeing Kinn in his underwear. Luckily, he isn't in his briefs, as Porsche warned, and has actually managed to put all his clothes on the right way round, unlike his lover. Porsche's shirt with its overabundance of buttons looks awkward on him. Goosebumps rise on the skin of his arms at the thought of Kinn in a dress shirt buttoned all the way to the top. It's unnatural. We can't take in every waif and stray you find on your travels, cousin, Kinn says amusedly. Like anything he says will stop Vegas from bringing them home and giving them somewhere to belong. But they love each other, and one is the other's bodyguard. That practically makes them family already. Oh, all right then, but don't think I've forgotten about the deal you're supposed to broker. His father was trying to drown him in an ugly indoor pool, cousin, says Vegas. He didn't know what it was about the ugliness of the pool that made him feel the need to inform everyone about it, but it felt like a piece of vital information. Imagine being drowned in a pool by your father and he had the nerve to pick an ugly-ass pool as the one to do it in. It was profoundly disappointing. The average Sims player put more thought into drowning a Sim than this corrupt politician had his own son. Kinn loudly sighed and face-palmed at his words. See, it is destiny. He has a weirdly abusive dad and probably a lot of mummy issues. That's family. The door opened behind Vegas and he turned to see who he assumed would be Porsche coming to save Kinn from him, but in the doorway stood Pete. He looked a little worried. Someone had probably told him that Vegas had rushed back early and been seen going to the medical centre. He was wearing his leather driving gloves and looked like he'd been running. Vegas hugged him to reassure the former head bodyguard that he was safe and well. "P. Vegas, you're back so quickly. What happened?" "He adopted another stray," Kinn so helpfully added. Pete smiled gently, lifting a stray hair out of Vegas's eyes. "Where did you find them?" "A swimming pool," Kinn sighs. End of chapter 1.